is Amy Collins, and I'm one of the managers in therapy services with Harris County Department of Education. Today we're going to be doing a webinar on what to do when sensory processing interferes with school success. We're going to be discussing everything from how to evaluate a student who may have sensory processing challenges to how to intervene to help them be more successful at school. One of the things that we need to understand about sensory processing is that sensation is something that affects everyone, but we all experience sensation in different and unique ways. There's not a right way or a wrong way to process sensory information, and we have little control over how we process it. However, the way we process sensory information can be beneficial in some situations and detrimental in others. So, in the school setting, sensory processing should be viewed in relation to the child's environment and to the task that the child needs to complete. For children who are under or over responsive to sensory input, participating in school activities and making friends can often be a challenge. However, the way we process sensory information can be beneficial in some situations and detrimental in others. So in the school setting, sensory processing should be viewed in relation to the child's environment or the task they need to accomplish. So the first step to looking at kids that may have sensory processing challenges is, of course, the evaluation process. Just to give you an overview of how we might evaluate a student who has sensory processing challenges, our goal is really to identify the IEP goals and objectives where the student is not making adequate progress, and to identify other areas such as extracurricular activities where the student might be having difficulty at school. We also want to determine, if possible, the underlying reason or reasons for the difficulty. And finally, as an outcome, we'll want to know what we need to know in order to provide what's needed for the student to participate and learn effectively. So when we evaluate a student, we want to begin by interviewing any school personnel who know the student and have information that could be helpful to us. We want to talk to the student's parent or guardian to get their perspective of things that the child may be doing at home. Some students may receive private occupational therapy services outside the school setting. If we have permission from the parent, we may want to talk with them to get their perspective of what the difficulties are and things that they may be doing that are helping. And finally, of course, we want to talk with the student. So when we evaluate a student, of course, we want to interview any school personnel who might have information about the student that could help us. We also want to talk to the student's parent or guardian to find out what their perspective is of the child's sensory processing and how they may be participating or behaving at home. If some students receive occupational therapy in an outpatient setting, if we have consent from the parent, we'll definitely want to talk to that child's private therapist to find out their perspective about any sensory processing challenges that they feel the student has and things that they may be doing with the student that are working.
What about me?
And of course, Jamie, you always want to talk with the student to find out their perspective of what's going on. What's challenging for them at school? What do they do well? What do they feel like they don't do well? As part of any evaluation, we always want to make sure that we review the student's state folder, observe the student where and when they're having difficulty with activities. We want to observe the student in all their school environments, the classroom, but also the hallways, the playground, the cafeteria, the gymnasium, in order to compare their participation in those settings. And sometimes it's necessary to administer standardized assessment tools. Some of those standardized assessment tools that you may want to use with a child that you suspect has sensory processing difficulties would include the sensory profiles or the sensory processing measure. If you do decide to administer standardized testing, you want to be sure that you relate the results of the testing back to other data that you've collected, for example, from observations and interviews with teachers and parents. What from the testing is consistent or not consistent with other things that you've seen or heard? And of course, when you've collected all of your data from all sources, you want to be sure that when you're summarizing your evaluation, that you include all concerns that were identified in the school setting. You want to support areas of concern with data, describe how those areas of concern affect learning or participation or performance for the child, address how those areas of concern relate back to the student's disability or disabilities, and address to what extent concerns are being addressed already by the student's current program. The final part of your evaluation process will be, based on your interpretation of the data you collected, you need to determine, does this student need your service to benefit from his or her education program, and what specific strategies or supports might help them participate or learn better at school. In general, there are several categories of interventions that you might use with a student who has sensory processing differences. Sensory stories, sensory diets, strategies to manage aversive or distracting sensory stimuli, strategies to manage underarousal or overarousal, and different types of adaptive equipment can all be used to help a student who has challenges in these areas.